Child's Play by War Admiral 2420. Old men can make war, but it is children who will make history. Ray Merritt. What began as a straightforward raid became a rout that put a mark of shame on the Legion for millennia. All over a colony of hairless, pink bipeds foolish enough to plant their flag on an outer rim planet belonging to the Most High Emperor. The colony was first discovered when unencrypted transmissions to an unknown location were intercepted. The point of origin was a planet that moved in and out of habitable zones in a wandering orbit of a trinary star system. Curious. Due to the unreliable temperature variation, the system had been written off, abandoned, only being used occasionally for short mining expeditions when the appropriate bodies were temporarily inside a temperate zone. It so happened that the colony stood on one such planet that, according to estimates, would be in a habitable zone for 3 decicycles. A small formation of 2 cruisers and 3 light battlecraft took the planet quickly. All interlopers were killed with minimal casualties and losses. The bulk of the ground forces returned to orbit, while a small detachment remained to survey the structures and equipment used by the colonists. The operation went smoothly, as most items' functions were quickly determined and catalogued. The planet's spin, combined with its current position in its looping orbit, made the day short, and night quickly fell. As the light faded, the crews began noticing phantom signals on their scans. Both thermal and visual scans would show short bursts of activity that would stop as quickly as they started and leave no trace or sign of changes. Once the light had fully left the sky, we had our first casualty. They were only discovered by our redundant patrols that would double over the watch area. We had not expected these patrols to be necessary, and had been told, in no uncertain terms, that our lives would be made miserable if our commander had to hear one more utterance about it. No one was complaining after that. Following the first loss, in rapid succession, several more bodies were found. All bore minimal signs of trauma, no defensive wounds, and even had their weapons in safe condition. The quickly dwindling detachment called for reinforcements and relayed the developing situation to the ships above. We were met with derision, reluctance, and finally what amounted to a token gesture arrived at the surface. A dozen more soldiers stepped off the landing craft with 2 heavy kinetic drivers, multiple stationary lighting rigs, and a multi-scanner capable of sensing more of the electromagnetic spectrum and in greater detail. The scanner showed approximately 10 shadows, as we took to calling them, darting around the encampment. We were unable to determine an exact number because the signals kept disappearing and reappearing, much to our chagrin. Even following the signals and using the lighting rigs, these shadows were indiscernible in the dark, with only puffs of the fine sand trailing in the air where there should have been a body. Over the next several hours, our equipment began failing, and lighting rigs would crash to the surface or overload their power source. When the transceiver for our communications array exploded, tensions were running high and fear began creeping into our minds. Most of the original detachment was dead, save the 2 officers and a couple of troops. The bulk of the force left to protect the communications array, and when our backs were to the encampment, kinetic rounds began ripping into our flank. In our hurry to protect our lifeline to orbit, only a few soldiers were manning the kinetic drivers. The repeating flashes gave us our first glimpse of the phantoms assailing us. It appeared to be a smaller version of the bipeds. The sprout of hair growing on their head was long and pulled tightly to its head. Their 2 eyes appeared to be glistening with a dark rim around them, trailing down in thin lines on the flesh beneath them. Their mouth was pulled into a tight snarl, with small, white teeth showing. After a few moments of continuous fire, we heard a guttural roar, high in pitch, coming from the small biped. Emperor's might, such ferocity and anger emanated like a solar flare from one so small. Our returning fire sent the small creature in a hasty retreat. While approaching the kinetic driver, we noticed a small rod had been jammed into the rail system. Repairable, but time-consuming. With our communications array still down, we used the dropship to signal for further reinforcements. This time, backup came quickly and in force. Incredible that these small bipeds would require more presence and power than their larger counterparts. The dropships brought with them more heavy kinetic drivers, several dozen troops, explosive and chemical weapons, and more lighting rigs. Light began returning to the sky as the final rigs were set up and the perimeter reinforced. We had our first break when one of the small bipeds was captured attempting to drag away a container of the chemical and explosive charges. It was even smaller than the first, its hair shorter and the color of fire, with light skin and small spots all over. It fought like a cornered batrisque, whirling around, smashing into anything it could reach with its small limbs. The light of day did nothing to dispel its terrifying appearance, and its strength was astonishing for its size. The first time it was grabbed, it bit right through the forelimb of one soldier, even with our toughened exoskeleton, and struck another, with both lower limbs, directly in their mouth, breaking their two lower mandibles. All of this while wailing like something from a nightmare. The noise only stopped after it sustained a sharp blow to its head. A thin red liquid leaked from just above its eye, such a curious color for Icar, and its heaving torso motion slowed, then stopped. After a few moments, we heard a wailing, mournful cry that was quickly stifled. The depths of sorrow expressed in such a primal cry filled every soldier with a deep sense of unease. Patrols sent in the direction of the noise found nothing but a shallow pit and deep gouges of disturbed ground. The day was uneventful, mostly filled with preparations for the impending nightfall. Patrols tripled, and the encampment was filled with nervous activity as the suns fell below the horizon. With the dark, they came. Small bodies darting in and out of the shadows, appearing and disappearing, leaving a trail of bodies and broken equipment. In the light of day, they dissolved away like mist in the wind. Wave after wave of reinforcements, heavy attack craft that would vaporize their tiny forms and leave craters in their wake, even orbital bombardment. They were unceasing and relentless and equally uncatchable. After nearly a decicycle, we only killed 3 more of them, all while sustaining catastrophic losses not seen in decacycles. Our fate was sealed when we discovered the small bipeds had activated a powerful transceiver that called out into the depths of space and summoned more of their kind. Massive, gleaming ships equipped to destroy a planet and decimate any spaceborne enemy. Large metal pods that dropped like flaming meteors, screaming through the atmosphere, carried new, taller bipeds. They were not the same ones we slaughtered with little resistance on arrival. Their armor rendered our weapons useless, and even more quickly than we had taken the planet, we were captured and our ships detained. We watched as the same brutally efficient and violent hands gently, tenderly, lifted the tiny limp bodies we had killed. Their eyes leaked, the same as the small, long-haired one, and made the wailing noises we'd heard in the distance. One of them walked with anger in his face to the closest of our kind and fired 4 shots into his torso, bits of ichor and carapace bursting into the air behind him. The biped was quickly trapped, forcibly disarmed, and restrained to our collective shock. The ones who restrained him spoke harshly in rough staccato, then softly and gently. Sitting with his forelimbs behind him, he leaked from his eyes, torso heaving, but silent now. The remaining small bipeds walked, in a loose group, towards the landing craft. Bipeds in white with small machines received them. The small ones looked ragged and dirty, bodies slumped, heads slightly bowed forward. A couple of them looked back at us, faces twisted and mouths in a snarl before turning back to the tall ones in white. We didn't know it, but we were watching the beginning of the end of our empire. We would be diminished, beaten, and humiliated in what would be called the Children's War by these bipeds. Humans, they called themselves. Then, as we would come to find out was commonplace for our conquerors, they helped us rebuild. While they ensured we would no longer be an empire built in blood, our vast shipping lanes and economic ties would be used to improve the greater galactic community. We never forgot, and made sure anyone who would listen knew that the humans are never to be underestimated. Not even the children. Especially the children.